There's a very specific sound that entitlement makes when it walks on gravel, a kind of rhythmic, aggressive crunching that cuts right through the morning silence. And that sound is exactly what ruined my coffee at 6 a.m. I was leaning against the hood of my patrol charger, watching the steam rise from my mug and drift into the cool morning air, just trying to mentally prepare for another shift keeping Red Rock County safe, listening to the sprinklers hiss against the manicured lawns of Oakhaven Reserve when I saw her coming. She was marching across the street like she was invading Poland, designer clogs clicking, eyes locked on my vehicle like it was a pile of radioactive waste, and before I could even take a sip, Patty Caldwell was screaming about how my presence was destroying the neighborhood aesthetic. "That eyesore doesn't belong in a family community," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the county seal on my door, completely oblivious to the irony that she was essentially calling the police on the police, asking me what I would do if the HOA towed my work vehicle from my own driveway. Drop a comment below if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thought a clipboard gave them the power of a deity, because trust me, Patty was just getting started, and she had no idea she was picking a fight with a man who investigates criminals for a living. Let me back up and paint the picture for you, because 6 months ago, I was just Deputy Chief Caleb Thorne, a man trying to piece his life back together after losing my wife, Elena, to a brutal battle with cancer that had drained our savings account faster than we could count it. When I got the promotion to Deputy Chief, I had to sell our dream home and move into something that wouldn't bankrupt a single father raising 2 twin daughters, Maya and Lily, which is how we ended up in Oakhaven Reserve, a collection of 47 identical beige boxes where the grass is measured with rulers and dreams go to die under the weight of community standards. The brochure promised safety and property value protection, but they forgot to mention the resident dictator, Patty Caldwell, a woman who treated the HOA covenants like holy scripture and viewed herself as the high priestess of compliance. She was the compliance coordinator, a made-up title that basically meant she had license to terrorize the neighborhood, a woman who had moved here after a messy divorce and decided that if she couldn't control her ex-husband, she was going to control the height of everyone's hedges. For 6 months, I parked my Charger in the driveway, standard procedure for a take-home vehicle, intended to provide visibility and rapid response. And honestly, crime in the area had dropped 15% since I moved in because burglars generally don't hit streets where a sheriff's cruiser is sitting out front. But Patty looked at that car like it was a meth lab on wheels, and when I tried to explain the county policy, showing her the actual text about emergency vehicle exemptions, she just scoffed with a voice so sugary it could induce a diabetic coma, telling me she didn't care about my little policies, because this was about property values, citing HOA Covenant Section 4.2.1 regarding commercial eyesores. "Are you threatening me?" she asked when I mentioned that having a police car actually lowers insurance rates, whipping out her phone to record me like I was the aggressor, accusing me of using my badge for intimidation. And that's when I realized this wasn't about parking, it was about power. I've spent 15 years studying bullies, from schoolyards to prison yards, and they all operate on the same frequency, testing boundaries, escalating pressure, and picking targets they assume won't fight back because they're too tired or too scared. My girls, Maya and Lily, watch from the window with that terrified look children get when they sense instability, asking if the mean lady was going to make us move again, and I tucked them in that night promising that grown-ups work things out, which turned out to be the biggest lie I've ever told. 3 days later, the certified letter hit my mailbox like a grenade, a formal notice of covenant violation on thick, expensive paper, giving me 72 hours to remedy the situation or face escalating enforcement. And the kicker was that she had copied Sheriff O'Malley, my boss, clearly trying to jeopardize my career. But here's the thing about trying to bully a high-ranking law enforcement officer. We have access to resources, databases, and a level of patience that most people lack. So instead of panicking, I spent my lunch break digging into the HOA bylaws, specifically Appendix C, where I found the emergency services exemption clear as day. I wrote a response that was a masterpiece of professional restraint, citing County Ordinance 2019-45 and State Statute 720, politely suggesting Ms. Caldwell familiarize herself with the law before playing attorney, thinking that would be the end of it, but I was dead wrong. Within 48 hours, Patty went full scorched earth, going door to door like a suburban Paul Revere warning the British were coming. Except the British was my patrol car, and the threat was a made-up story about how my vehicle made the neighborhood look like a crime scene, driving down property values. She managed to get 8 signatures out of 47 houses, mostly by bullying people or confusing them, and presented it as a unanimous neighborhood revolt, which triggered my investigative instincts because something about her intensity felt desperate, like a gambler doubling down on a bad hand. I started running background checks, just a little curiosity, and discovered a pattern that made my blood run cold. Realizing she had done this to Mrs. Alvarez over a landscaper's truck, to Mr. Henderson, a Vietnam vet, over his RV, and to Sarah Miller, an ER nurse, over her 15-year-old Honda. I went over to Sarah's house for coffee, and as we sat there, the stories started pouring out, stories of a reign of terror where Mr. Sterling was threatened over garden gnomes and Dr. Eris was cited for Christmas lights hung 2 days too early, always targeting the people who were different, lower income, or too busy working to fight back. That night, sipping bourbon on my back porch while the crickets chirped, I pulled the county property records, and that's when I found the first loose thread in Patty's sweater, a discovery that made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. The management company, Caldwell Management Solutions, was incorporated 3 years ago with a single owner, Patricia Caldwell. Our dear compliance coordinator wasn't just a busybody. She was billing the neighborhood for the privilege of harassing her own neighbors, collecting fees for every letter sent, every inspection made, turning her personality disorder into a profitable business model. I closed my laptop, looking up at the stars, and smiled because tomorrow I was going to start building a case that would make Patty Caldwell wish she had never learned the word HOA. Realizing that she had forgotten the one rule you never break. Sheriffs don't just enforce the laws, we hunt down the people who break them. If Patty wanted a war, she was going to get a masterclass in strategic dismantling, but her next move proved she had the tactical awareness of a suicidal lemming. It started on a Wednesday morning when Officer Dave Higgins from City Code Enforcement rolled into my driveway, looking about as comfortable as a cat in a bathtub, mumbling about a complaint regarding unlicensed security business operations at my address. I actually snorted my coffee when he said it, pointing at the massive county seal on my door and asking him if he realized this was an assigned government vehicle, not a side hustle. And poor Dave just sighed, checking his boxes, admitting the complaint came from a woman who had filed 6 false reports this year alone. This was harassment, pure and simple, weaponizing bureaucracy to embarrass me. But it got worse that afternoon when Sheriff O'Malley called me into his office, looking pained as he explained that Councilwoman Vance was getting calls about my intimidation tactics, forcing him to suggest I park at the station until things cooled down. That was her strategy, use political pressure and public shame to force submission. But she had just made it personal. So that evening, Sarah Miller hosted a secret war council in her kitchen, attended by the outcasts of Oakhaven Reserve, including Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Alvarez, and the quiet Dr. Eris. As they spilled their guts, a terrifying picture emerged. Patty wasn't just fining people. She was providing the solution, rejecting their contractors, and forcing them to use specific companies like Caldwell Landscaping or Caldwell Home Repair, which Dr. Eris confirmed were all owned by the same shell company. She created the violation, recommended the fix, and collected money on both ends. A perfect circle of fraud that crossed the line from being a neighborhood nuisance to organized racketeering. And I felt that electric tingle I always get when a case cracks wide open. Document everything, I told them. Every letter, every invoice, every threat. Because we were about to build a federal case right under her nose. Friday brought Patty's nuclear option, an emergency board meeting scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m., a time chosen specifically because normal people have jobs, with an agenda that screamed about immediate action regarding safety concerns. I did a little reconnaissance Monday night, driving past Mr. Sterling's McMansion, seeing the lights blazing and Patty inside, waving her arms like a conductor leading a symphony of destruction, plotting my demise. The meeting was a farce, a kangaroo court held in the sterile community center where 12 people showed up, half of them her cronies, and despite my calm presentation of state statutes and crime statistics, the vote was rigged from the start, resulting in a 3-2 decision to fine me $500 per day for continued violation. She handed me the notice with a smile that could power a lighthouse, telling me I had 30 days to comply before they placed a lien on my home, effectively trying to find me out of the neighborhood. But she didn't know I had already engaged the nuclear option of my own. That night, fueled by rage and stale coffee, I dove into the deep history of the neighborhood, tracing the original developer, Oakhaven Development Corp., and at 11 p.m., I found the smoking gun, the document that changed everything. The developer had gone bankrupt in 2019, and according to the filing, legal control of the HOA was supposed to transfer to the homeowners via an election within 90 days, but that election never happened. Patty and her company, Caldwell Management Solutions, had simply continued operating in a vacuum, seizing power without legal authority, meaning for 2 years, every fine, every rule, every lien was completely illegitimate because the HOA, legally speaking, didn't exist. I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, laughing a low, dangerous laugh, realizing that we had been paying protection money to a suburban gangster who had less legal standing than a kid with a lemonade stand. I pulled up the financials with fresh eyes, seeing $127,000 stolen from 47 families, disguised as management fees and special assessments. And just as I was calculating the prison time, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emergency. Patty called another meeting. She's planning something huge. While Patty was plotting her next move, she had no idea that I was already on the phone with the State Attorney General's Fraud Division, explaining to a very interested prosecutor that I had uncovered a massive, multi-year organized crime scheme operating in suburbia. We spent the weekend assembling the Avengers of Oakhaven Reserve, Jessica Pearson, a ruthless corporate attorney who lived 3 streets over, and Dr. Aris with his forensic accounting skills, building a file of evidence thick enough to stop a bullet. We discovered Patty had been paying herself consulting fees that existed in no bylaws, funneling money to her shell companies, and committing mail fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion, filling 3 whiteboards in Sarah's dining room with a web of corruption that centered on one woman and her insatiable greed. The trap was set for the annual meeting on Tuesday, where we would let her present her fraudulent financials to the entire community while state investigators recorded every lie. But Patty, in her arrogance, decided to take a victory lap that would accelerate her own destruction. Monday morning, Patty posted a triumphant status on the neighborhood Facebook page, hashtagging Community First and Law and Order, gloating about forcing the entitled sheriff to comply, while simultaneously slapping 6 more families with violation notices to fund her legal war chest. But the real drama started Tuesday morning when I walked out to find my patrol Charger vandalized, paint keyed, tires slashed, and the antenna bent. A clumsy attack captured in 4K resolution by my neighbor's security camera, revealing the culprit to be none other than Kyle Caldwell, Patty's 17-year-old son. He was in juvenile detention by breakfast, facing charges for destroying government property, and while Patty was frantically calling the station, trying to use her non-existent influence, the media circus arrived. She went on Channel 8 News, crying crocodile tears about police corruption, painting herself as the victim of a rogue sheriff. A performance so convincing that for a few hours, the internet actually hated me, trending hashtags like #badgeprivilege, unaware that federal warrants were being signed at that very moment. Then came the final blow. Patty issued an emergency special assessment demanding $2,000 from every household within 48 hours to fund a legal defense fund, threatening immediate foreclosure on anyone who didn't pay. Panic swept through Oakhaven Reserve like a plague. Mr. Henderson was shaking, Mrs. Alvarez was in tears because she couldn't afford it, and I realized Patty was targeting the vulnerable, predatory lending disguised as governance, which was the final straw that led me to call the FBI white-collar crime unit. Tuesday night, the elementary school auditorium was packed with 89 terrified residents, the air thick with the smell of floor wax and fear, as Patty took the stage in a power suit, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that fabricated budget shortfalls and demanded more money to fight government tyranny. She was in the middle of asking for $45,000 when I stood up from the back row, holding a manila folder, and the room went deathly silent as I walked down the center aisle, feeling every eye on me. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your authority to collect these fees," I said, my voice projecting with courtroom precision. And when she tried to shut me down, I turned to the crowd and dropped the bomb. According to bankruptcy filings from 2019, this HOA ceased to legally exist 2 years ago. Patty's face went pale, her composure cracking like cheap plaster as she stammered about technicalities. But the denial died in her throat when the back doors swung open and the state investigators walked in, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Patricia Caldwell, you are under arrest for organized fraud, racketeering, and grand larceny," the lead agent announced, and the gas from the room sucked all the oxygen out of the building. Watching her get handcuffed in front of the neighbors she had terrorized was a level of poetic justice that Shakespeare couldn't have written, especially when they marched her out to my backup patrol vehicle for transport, the very commercial eyesore she had tried to banish. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed as she was led away. But nobody was listening. The applause started slowly, then erupted into a roar of relief and vindication as 87 people realized the nightmare was finally over. 6 months later, Patty was trading her designer wardrobe for an orange jumpsuit, sentenced to 18 months in federal prison plus restitution, after her lawyers realized fighting the mountain of evidence we had collected was pointless. We recovered $425,000, refunding every illegal fine and fee with interest, and used the leftover criminal proceeds to establish the Oak Haven Community Scholarship, turning her greed into a legacy of education. The neighborhood transformed. Sarah became the new, legitimate HOA president, running things with transparency and kindness. Mr. Henderson put his garden gnomes back out, and my daughters learned that sometimes you have to stand up and fight because bullies rely on silence to survive. I still park my Charger in the driveway every day, and every morning it gleams in the sun as a reminder that true community isn't about rules and rulers. It's about neighbors protecting neighbors. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. At what point does enforcing the rules cross the line into tyranny? And do we have a moral obligation to dismantle systems that prey on the weak, even if they have a shiny title attached to them? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my shoes, and if you believe justice was truly served or if Patty got off too easy. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and remember, never underestimate a quiet sheriff with a coffee mug and a knowledge of the law. See you in the next one.